I also want to talk about how to make mindfulness relevant to what's happening right now. So like mindfulness is obviously, in my opinion, as the world is changing, mindfulness has become a much different thing in 2020 than maybe it was in 2019 with everything going on. You know, there's a lot of political stuff happening. We have a pandemic right now. How much harder is it to be mindful in a place where you're losing your mind with everything going on? But I don't know if you want to go into that.
Well, we can touch into it.
Okay.
For me, it almost makes it easier.
Hot take.
What's that?
It's a hot take.
Is it? Okay. So it's easier in the sense that you have so much shit coming at you all of the time that, you know, it kind of forces you into this, at least it does me, into this place of like, if I don't practice something, I'm going to overload. I'm going to get overwhelmed. And mindfulness is an amazing practice. There's a lot of offshoot practices around it that are sort of Eastern based, that go right against the grain of our culture, which is like letting go, allowing for. Mm-hmm. Right. Tara Brach wrote a book a number of years ago, and it's almost required reading for my practice, called Radical Acceptance. Right. And in it, she talks about the fact that, you know, acceptance in our culture says, well, what does that mean? We're quitting, you're giving up. It doesn't mean that. It means that I'm accepting in this moment that this is what this is. These are the circumstances that have been handed to me. So rather than wrestling with the fact that, oh no, this has happened, what do I do? And how does this happen to me? And, you know, why am I so unlucky? And all of the stuff that can kind of come around that rhetoric, we stop and we say, okay, this is a pandemic. What am I going to do? What can I do? What am I feeling? Mindfulness allows us an opportunity to stop and to feel into it and go, I'm really scared. I'm a little freaked out. It can also, there's a lot of people also like whispering to me, and probably to everyone else as well, like, yeah, but there's a part of me that's kind of happy for the pause. Mm-hmm. Like I got to push pause. But if I'm just caught up in my fear, or if I'm just watching the news and caught up in that, or on the clickbait, you know, news cycles, I can never really stop and go, okay, well, you know, there are aspects of this that, dare I say, are enjoyable to me, that there aren't any real, at least there shouldn't be any social pressures at this point if we're actually doing the quarantine and doing the things that we've been asked to do, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's an aspect of our culture that gets shut down a little bit, and some people are saying, you know, that part of it wasn't so bad for me. Mindfulness allows us to get in touch with the full breadth of our experience in that regard.
What about, so I think fear makes a lot of sense to me. I think for me, and I'm sure plenty of other people, there's a lot of anger. It's anger at the shit that's happening. What is anger from a mindfulness perspective? Is anger, if my wise self is the one that is the most mindful, it's my seat, I can view the world from that place. Mm-hmm. Can I be mindful and angry at the same time? And what do I do with that?
It's funny, you know, years ago, Barbara Walters interviewed the Dalai Lama, and, you know, she asked him essentially a similar question. He says, of course I'm angry, because essentially I've been thrown out of my country. You know, and he's lived in exile for years. Mm-hmm. And he's like, of course I'm angry. But when you're angry and you're using mindfulness practice there, and I use it a lot with those guys on Wall Street, right? Because I can notice that I'm angry, but I don't react to my anger. So rather than I'm angry and I'm in it and I'm saying and doing shit that I have to apologize for later, I'm able to go, wow, I'm angry. And I can get really curious. And that's a really big piece of mindfulness, is to be able to get curious about your experience. I also offer in my practice with these guys and current people that anger is a secondary response to something else, right? It's not, for me, I don't call it as one of the key emotions. It's an emotion, but it's a response to something. It's typically a response to pain, sadness, grief, overwhelm, you name it. But there's always, almost always, I mean, look, there's righteous anger, sure. But even that is probably because you've been wounded in some fashion, and some aspect of you, some part of you, and we can talk about that some other time, it's come up and said enough. But it gets really interesting when you can stand back from that and not have those knee-jerk reactions. And it makes life so much more easy to live, and you know, you're so much more connected when you're able to kind of go, I'm angry right now. That's really good information. But without it, you're just off to the races. You're doing stuff, you're saying stuff that you have to apologize for later.
What are my primary emotions? I think of it like colors. Like, what are my primary emotions?
What do you think? What do you think there?
Fear seems like a pretty primary. Sadness? There's got to be a good one, right? Like happiness. Is happiness a primary emotion?
Everyone says just that. They always get to this place where there's not many good ones.
There's got to be one good one. I mean, sure, I don't really like yellow and blue, but red's great. Like,
purple, obvious color that you
enjoy. Yeah, exactly.
So you have the gamut of those. I mean, joy is in there. There's shades of happiness that are there's sadness and grief, perhaps. There's a bunch of them, and the lists vary, and people argue, what's this? Is this a primary emotion, or is that a primary emotion? But I do think anger is a secondary response to other things. It's not for me, not one of the primaries.
And so is that like if we talk about mindfulness from the most basic, like this is the place where you're most aware, is the 102 level understanding these different emotions, and that if it's not one of these primary ones, then it's a secondary one, and we have to get underneath that to be mindful of truly like what you're experiencing in these moments. So I might be really angry at what's going on right now, but underneath that, I am both sad and fearful for people I love and people I don't know that I love, you know?
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. How do you practice mindfulness?
I try to do it every day, all the time. You know, my children offer a lot of opportunity for mindfulness.
That's really kind of them.
Yeah, they really do it every day. Yeah, I wasn't necessarily born. As I said to you before, I said I'm a dog person, and I'm a kid person based, case by case basis. But our relationships challenge us, our relationships to ourselves, our relationship to other people, your spouse, your kids, your pets, your relationship. I say we have a relationship to what we do in this world. And those relationships challenge us to be aware of what is bringing up in us. And if you're not, then you're on autopilot and you're living in reaction. So I practice it. I try to practice it across the board. It becomes really, really important for me to practice with clients, to be aware of, any of my stuff that may be creeping in. Maybe on this awesome conversation, I want to add this thing, but it's really important for me to sit back in the therapeutic container, if you will, and say, why am I offering this now? Is this something I just want to share because it's fun, or does it move the work along? And if it doesn't move the work along, it's important to kind of maybe decide whether you want to enter that into the conversation or not. Because that's really about you. And is your stuff creeping in? Now, so many therapists aren't practicing in this way, and their shit creeps in, right? And so you have clients out there, you have people going, yeah, that didn't really work out for me. It was weird. And so the therapeutic relationship can be clouded if you're not an aware or mindfully practicing therapist.